All right, I think I'm live and I think you should be able to hear me. This is my first time doing something quite like this, so bear with me. Hopefully, it's not a complete disaster. But quick introduction, my name is Stephen Robbins. I'm an immigration attorney in Yakima, Washington. Quick plug, I do have a podcast. Let's see, is it like this? Where is it? Like this. It's called Redirect. It's an immigration law podcast. We try and put it out every week with some exceptions. We need mostly mental health breaks from doing an immigration law podcast. So, but it's pretty good some of the time. Check it out if you're interested. Really quick message in Spanish. Para los que no hablan inglés, yo voy a repetir todo esto después, no palabra por palabra, sino pues un más o menos en español. Entonces puede esperar hasta el final y puede escuchar el mensaje en español. So I wanted to put together something that we could do for people who want DACA, who are curious about whether or not they qualify or what they'll need to apply. And that's what we're going to do today. So if you have papers and don't know anyone who might need DACA, this might be kind of boring for you, but you're welcome to watch anyways. That would be awesome. Real quick, what is DACA? DACA is a program that essentially says, we know you're undocumented, but we're going to let you work in the meantime. You're not an enforcement priority. So people who apply for DACA can get a work permit, a social security number, and they can get permission to travel to their country and come back. That's called advanced parole. So that's another benefit, but it's a separate benefit that has to be applied for. And advanced parole can open up other immigration options potentially. But in general, DACA is a good program. It's kind of the floor. I've heard it described as the floor, which means it's pretty much the lowest benefit that you can get in terms of immigration benefits. And it would be extremely frustrating. I know for a lot of my clients, if you're not born here, but if you're practically born here or you've spent most of your life here, it must be really, really frustrating to just have this work permit. And I understand that. At the same time, for a lot of people, it's a life changer. It opens up lots of doors that would have otherwise been closed. So you take the good with the bad in this case. But so that's what DACA is, right? You got to reapply every 2 years. You've got to do biometrics every 2 years, which means you go in, you have your fingerprints run and checked. They do a background check, and then you get a new work permit for another 2 years. So up the mic volume. Seriously? All right. Hopefully this is better. I don't want to go too loud. I'll be popping my peas. Don't read the comments. I think that's what they say online. All right. So let me know if this is loud enough. Now, before we get started, one common question obviously is, do I need a lawyer to do this? I'm a lawyer, so I'm the wrong person to ask. What I will say is DACA is one of the simpler things to apply for. I encourage people who think they might qualify to take a look at the paperwork, right? To listen to a video like this. And if you feel comfortable applying, then you should do it. Now, there's a couple of caveats. If you have any kind of criminal history, any arrests, even if it was like a juvenile thing or it was dismissed or whatever, I would recommend hiring a lawyer no matter what. Even if you look at the paperwork and you go, I can do this, I don't need a lawyer. Any type of criminal encounter is a red flag for me, and you're going to want to probably talk to a lawyer. And the other thing is, if you look at the paperwork and you go over it and you're thinking, I feel pretty confident, but not all the way confident, also a good idea. Also a good idea for you to probably hire a lawyer. I've done a lot of DACA fixes in my career where, you know, somebody had an attitude about lawyers, which I totally understand. I have it too. I don't need one, I don't need one. And then they needed one because they did it wrong or the case got denied, something like that. So um, I have some colleagues who, I mean, obviously, this is how we make our living. And so some lawyers are very protective of what they do. And they want to say that it's super risky to apply on your own without a lawyer. You absolutely have to have a lawyer, um, always, no matter what. And what I would say is you're in better hands if you have a good lawyer than if you go to like your cousin or you're doing it on your own. Um, but I also understand that this process is fairly straightforward. And if you were educated here and you can read the forms and you feel comfortable, um, you can always give it a shot with the understanding that, like, look, if it gets denied because you filled out something wrong or you did something wrong, that's going to be on you, right? And there might be the chance that it'll need to get cleaned up afterwards. That's just the risk of doing these types of things on your own. But plenty of people do it, and that's fine with me. You're not going to hurt my feelings. So let's see. A couple of frequently asked questions before we get started. That was one. Another one, is it risky to apply for DACA? Now, in 2012, when DACA was announced, we got this question all the time. And the answer was usually, for me at least, it's not risky. Obama did DACA because it's popular. And what kind of like idiot president would have to come along to undo like this wildly popular program? And that was a freezing cold take, it turns out. Trump did come along. He tried to undo it. And here we are at the end of 2020, and he was unsuccessful. Does that mean that it's impossible that in the future we get some other president who says, DACA's done, it's over, and we're going to peek behind the curtain and use that information for enforcement purposes? I almost said porpoises. What's that, like a turtle, right? A porpoise? Anyways, some kind of animal. Is it possible that could happen in the future? We had a game show host as president for the last 4 years. So I would never say it's impossible that something like that could happen. And like with most things that deal with immigration, the applicant has to weigh the potential benefits with the potential risks. And what I always tell people is you're considering the risk of applying in a vacuum. You have to also consider the risk of not applying. Maybe a dolphin, a turtle. I can't believe I said turtle. Oh, okay. So you've got to consider the risk of not applying. So let's say you don't apply, and you're not safer because you're in the shadows. You could be arrested on your way to work or in some sort of workplace raid or however. And so on the other hand, DACA does provide some protection against those types of enforcement actions, and also opens up other opportunities, other types of jobs or educational opportunities. And so, it's up to everybody to sort of weigh those potential risks in the future of applying for DACA and the benefits of applying and receiving DACA. And to me, it's a no-brainer. If I were in that situation, I would apply. I look at the people who didn't apply in 2012 because they were worried, and they're not better off for having not applied. And that's, just from my anecdotal experience. So a couple other things before we get into the nitty gritty of who applies and what you'll need. USCIS, that's immigration, the arm of immigration that looks at these kinds of things. They can and will look at your social media. And so take a quick look at that before you apply. Also, some generic recommendations. If you're filing like bank statements, in order to prove your continuous physical presence or something like that, take a look at your recent purchases. Maybe there's some things on there that you don't necessarily want to be sharing with the government. I'm not talking about illegal behavior. Most illegal purchases aren't done like through your bank account, but just things that might be embarrassing to you. And in terms of the social media, you do have to be careful. There have been horror stories of not in the DACA context necessarily, but people who have maybe one case I read about a guy who had an old Facebook photo. So when you're Facebook stalking somebody and you're clicking through their photos, and pretty soon you're in like 2008, 2007 or whatever, you're looking at these really old pictures. They had a picture like that from high school, and it was a big group of people, and somebody was throwing up gang signs in this picture, and they were tagged in it. It wasn't even the applicant throwing the gang signs. They just were in the picture. And that ended up being a problem for this particular applicant. So I always want to be careful with these things, because I don't want people to be paranoid and freaked out that like I can't post or I can't have, a TikTok. You can have a TikTok and you can post. You can be a hardcore poster as far as I'm concerned. I don't care. But if it takes a couple clicks to find pictures of you smoking marijuana or doing other things that you wouldn't necessarily want, the government to know when they're making a discretionary decision about your case, then real simple, you need to just go through and clean that up. So again, don't be paranoid, but be smart about your social media before you apply. And like if your email is, Weedmaster69 or whatever, maybe that's fine. You can get your junk mail at that. Well, you can do whatever you want with that email, but maybe it's time to get, another email address to use with your immigration application. Just saying. Okay. That's just a small piece of advice. I don't know anybody who's ever been denied because of their email address, but I'm just saying these things are discretionary. Somebody gets to comb through all this stuff, and it's not fair that they get to do that. And it's not fair that you have to, sanitize your social media history. I'm not saying this is the system because I like it, but that's just the reality. So before you apply, take a minute, go through your MySpace and your Friendster and all those old things, and do what you need to do. All right, so how do I do this? I'm just an old guy on a computer. I don't know what I'm doing, but I think it's working so far. So I'm going to hide this. This is, again, the podcast Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives. You can check it out if you're so inclined. So we're going to take a look at my DACA checklist. Now I'm like uncentered. Okay. I don't know if you can see this. Okay. If you can't, I can email it to you. Shoot me an email. My email is steven@robinsimmigration.com. I'm going to scoot over a little bit. All right. So as we talk about the evidentiary burden, we're also going to talk about what you need to qualify. You need to qualify in every sense. You can't, hit 5 of the 6 and then just be okay, right? And these are pretty bright line rules too. So just be aware of that. And I'm looking, okay, here we go. So the first requirement, you have to have entered the United States before you turn 16. And you need proof. You can't just say it. This is a problem for a lot of people who entered. So the cutoff is June 15th, 2007. There are people who entered June 1st, 2007, but they spent their first 3 weeks couch surfing, right, at their uncle's or something like that. They didn't do anything. They didn't go anywhere, sign up for anything. It's almost impossible for that person to get DACA, not because they don't technically qualify. Technically they do. It's impossible because they can't meet the evidentiary burden. And so that means proving that you were here before you were 16. Good proof is something like school records, your school ID, vaccination records are great. A lot of kids, contrary to sort of popular right-wing propaganda, they come here and they get their vaccines, and they get their little vaccine cards, and they're initialed with the date. Perfect immigration proof. We love that. Medical records. I've had people prove their physical presence with pretty embarrassing medical records, talking about their explosive diarrhea and stuff like that. I mean, hey, you got to prove it, right? So however you prove it, you got to prove it. So now, declarations or letters from people who are there. So if you're the crowd surfer on your uncle's couch, can your uncle write a letter and some other people write letters? Yes, but that's usually considered secondary evidence and not very strong evidence. And so that's a tough one. Really, really think about it. If you're struggling with evidence, I've had people who were on the brink of giving up, and we'd gone over it, and then something clicks. They realize I broke my leg, and sure enough, we go to the hospital, and we get the medical records, and in immigration law, there's this weird thing where you celebrate like horrible things that happen. You don't celebrate it literally, but it usually is good for the immigration case. And so you develop this perverse sense of humor. So you celebrate somebody's childhood bone break. Anyhow, so if you entered the United States, if you crossed the border and you were 16 years old at the time, no DACA. If you were 15 and 364 days, then yes, DACA, possibly, right? So far. The link to the Redirect podcast, the website is redirectpodcast.com. And it's also on Stitcher, Spotify, and iTunes. And YouTube, right here on this channel. How about that? All right, so the second thing you need is continuous physical presence since June 15th of 2007. Now, this one is going to get tricky because when Obama announced DACA, you needed 5 years of continuous physical presence. And then obviously that time, the start date, June 15th, 2007, is a fixed date. And then as time goes on, that's how calendars work, you need more and more time, right? And what's crazy to think is it's been 8 years since DACA was announced. So now instead of proving 5 years of continuous physical presence, the applicant has to come up with 13 years of proof that they've lived in the United States. For some people, easy peasy, no big deal. They've got pay stubs, they've got bills, they've got tax returns, school records. Where this gets tricky is for people who've maybe taken a couple years off, or they graduated high school or they dropped out of high school and then they worked cash for a couple years and they weren't really paying bills, or they were, babysitting their younger siblings, and as a result, like nothing's really in their name. That can get tricky. We had a case like that. We tried to use Facebook screen grabs of times they were tagged here and there and their Facebook activity, and that was a no-no. Immigration did not care about their social media posting as in terms of proving that they were in the United States since 2007. Now, this is really important. The way that this works is that you need to file something from every year. Some people, we'll go over this. I'll show them the list and I'll explain this. And then people will bring in one thing from 2007 and one thing from 2020. And they say, see, I've been here the whole time. But that's not how immigration works. They're going to want at least one thing from each of those years, preferably 2 or 3 things if you can. I'm not a Nazi about it in terms of, I've heard other lawyers say, you need every month of every year. And that hasn't been my experience. That could change with this sort of new DACA. Who knows what the standard will be exactly, but in my experience, you don't need to prove every month of every year, but you do need to touch every year. So when people bring in the sort of, immigration lawyers will know this phenomenon, the backpack full of pay stubs and just stuff, all the stuff. And you go through it and you've got 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. You're missing a couple of years. You got to find something from that time. And it's not just going to be good enough, right? Typically, if there's a gap like this, immigration will send what's called a request for evidence and offer you an opportunity to fix the problem. But it's obviously better to file it fully prepared. You need to prove your age. So you have to be at least 15 years old to apply. If you know somebody who's 13, 14 and they want to apply, too bad. We always file with their birth certificate that proves their age. There's also a cutoff age. And honestly, bad loitering, but it's escaping me. Some people are too old. I think in 2012, when it was announced, June 15, 2012, I think you had to be, it's like under 31 or something like that at that time. So I'll have to look that up. But some people might be too old for DACA. Too old. All those old 30-year-olds. Gross. So old. All right. So there is a educational requirement to DACA. You need to either have your high school diploma. Can you guys see my mouse? You can't, right? That's not how this works. Okay. You need to either have your high school diploma, have your GED, or you need proof of enrollment in one of those two things, high school or a GED program. Make sure if you're enrolled or enrolled in high school or a GED program, that it's like an actual program. We had some people who were in these sort of like diploma mill online schools that, that's a no-no. So you need to find out if it's a high school, it needs to be accredited by your state. And each state has usually a website where their Department of Education will list the certified or accredited schools. And same with the GED program. There's probably lots of wacky online GED programs that aren't going to count. My suggestion would be to enroll at your local community college or a local university. Local high schools might have GED programs. Now, you should, if you're going to enroll to get your GED, getting your GED is a good idea, and you should finish the program, period. That's my personal advice. As a lawyer, I would tell you that up until now, DACA applicants aren't required to actually have their GED. So if you're enrolled and you're going, and then further on down the road, the test is too hard, you're unable to finish, that hasn't been disqualifying for either the initial GED or renewals. People have been able to renew even though they didn't necessarily finish their GED. That's something that could be subject to change in the future. I mean, I don't know, but that's just that's the way it is. So if you enroll in a GED program, what I would say is give it a good faith effort. That's my legal recommendation and personal recommendation. And if it doesn't work out because school is just not for you, after really trying, giving it a go, then fine. It's not going to affect your case as long as you were enrolled at the time that you applied. If you enroll and then never go and then apply, they could deny it. They could say you weren't enrolled at the time that you applied. I mean, technically you paid the fee, but so just be careful about that. One of the requirements when Obama announced the program on June 15, 2012, is that the applicants had to have been in the United States when the program was announced. And the point of that was to not encourage people who maybe had recently left a year ago. They entered when they were kids and the family went back, and then they hear about DACA, and so they, cross back illegally. They didn't want to do that. So they had to put this in place to say when it was announced, you had to have been here. And so this is the only specific date that you have to actually shoot for. The continuous physical presence since 2007 is broad, right? Anything from any time during those years. But June 15th, 2012 is a specific date that you need to do everything you can to hit that date as close as you can. Now, it doesn't have to be exactly the 15th, but if you have a pay stub from, the first part or the second part of that month, that should do it. Usually school records, if you were in school, will show that the semester or the trimester, however, typically ends in June, at least in Washington. So when we would get a high school transcript and it showed, the start and end date of the final semester, there it says June, and they finished their school year. So that's all the proof that we needed. Now, this was a lot easier before, because in 2012, it was 2012, because again, that's how calendars work. And it was really easy to say, we need proof that you were here 3 months ago. Okay, well, I'm surrounded by stuff from more or less that time, right? But now, again, it's been 8 years. And so for a lot of people, it might be hard. You might have to, maybe you don't have the pay stubs sitting around anymore. You might have to go to the employer and get a letter or a payroll history. If you were having children at that time, I'm sure you can get a summary of the doctor of your prenatal visits. Maybe you come close to hitting June. If you don't have anything from June, like June, or June 15th, you can really sort of bulk up the evidence from May and July, and sometimes that will work, right? As long as you have enough evidence. But you got to try as hard as you can to hit that date. Now, in terms of criminal record, again, my recommendation at the beginning was, if you have any criminal record, hire a lawyer for sure. You could be disqualified. I'm not going to spend too much time going into the criminal bars to DACA. My legal advice for anyone listening will just be, if you have any encounters with the police, other than simple speeding traffic infractions, then you should see a lawyer. But even things like driving without a license, obviously DUI, domestic violence, any of that stuff could be an issue. And a lot of times there's this phenomenon with, where immigration attorneys are talking to their clients and asking about, have you ever been any type of criminal history? And a lot of times people will say no, not because they're trying to hide something, but because they went to court, they paid the fine, to them, the case is resolved. But that's still important. Even if you had a DUI and you went to court and you paid your fines and you did the classes and you did everything, you're still likely disqualified. And so you just need to talk to a lawyer about that, and make sure that, it also depends on the state. In Washington, a DUI is disqualifying. Negligent driving, which they call a wet neg, because it's like a slightly, it says something like, the police had reason to believe that you may have been intoxicated, something like that, but there's no proof that you were intoxicated. That's also disqualifying in my experience, but reckless driving is not. And so depending on what state you're in, that could be totally reversed or different depending on the statutes in each state. So it's not only a good idea to hire a lawyer, the best idea is to hire, if you have a crimmigration problem, you really should hire somebody local who doesn't suck, who's not going to steal your money, because they're going to be more familiar with sort of the local lay of the land, so to speak. So on top of that, this is kind of a tricky one for a lot of people in terms of the evidence or the information that's in the forms. You're going to want to list all the addresses you've ever had in the United States. And for some people, that's a long list. It's going to take a lot of work, but you got to get busy writing. For some people, they came, they lived in a house, and they've lived there ever since. And those people are a blessing from God. But if you've been moving around, then, you got to write down all those addresses along with the dates that correspond. So from this date to this date, I lived here, and then we moved here until this date, and so on and so forth. 2 passport style photos. You can get those at Costco, Costco.com. Free plug. And then the filing fee is $495. Oh, you can see when I highlight. Look at that. Whew. So convenient. I should have known that earlier. 2 passport style photos, check or money order made out to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Um, and don't forget a photo ID. Photo ID. Uh, in terms of the filing fee, USCIS does have a way to pay online. I've never done it. Don't do it. It's bad. If they from this is just from fellow practitioners, I've been told don't even try. At one point, I was online payment curious, and some colleagues put an end to that. Basically, there are all kinds of issues apparently with like your card gets rejected, and then you know they'll send the whole application back, and meanwhile, like it's been a month and a half or something like that. So those kinds of things can happen. It's just better to either write a personal check or get a money order. If you write a personal check, it better be from an account that you know is not going to bounce. If you know it's not going to bounce, that's totally fine. If it bounces, you'll get fined. So, yeah, let's see. I think that's about it. I think I was gonna do this on Facebook, but no. So let me just real quick. I'm gonna hop over to Facebook and see if anybody has questions. I don't think so. Let's take a look. This is really exciting for all my YouTube listeners. I'm not seeing any questions over there, but anyhow, here we are. And let me go back to YouTube. I don't see any other questions. The forms you can find on the immigration website, uscis.gov. There's 3 forms, the I-821D, the I-765, and the I-765 worksheet, or WS. They all need to be filled out. Fill them out meticulously. And again, if you start working on it and you notice like this is getting weird, this is getting complicated, hire a lawyer. Do it right. Establish a relationship with a lawyer, which could be useful for later on. One other thing I wanted to talk about, advanced parole. People, this has been a really popular question. Advanced parole is a permit which allows you to return from travel abroad. So even though you have DACA, you don't get to just like go to Mexico or Canada or anywhere else. DACA just says you can stay here. If you leave, like you've made your decision as far as the law is concerned, which is one of the crazy things about immigration law is that, it's really all or nothing. If somebody has DACA and they say, you know what, like, I like it here, but I also want to spend my winter months in Mexico. I can work during the year and then go down to Mexico during the winter and, chill or whatever. They can't do that. That's just not an option. And you would think that the immigration restrictionists would invite people spending more time out of the country, but they don't. People really have to make a choice. But advanced parole is a way that you can apply for a permit to come back. Typically, the reasons for wanting to travel are family related or humanitarian reasons. So I've got a grandparent who I've never met. She's ill. My father was deported 10 years ago. I really want to see him. These are the kinds of things that people usually use as reasons for wanting to travel in my practice, in my experience. And so you can apply. The government fee is $575. There's a form that you fill out, and you need proof of whatever it is, whatever your reason is for going. There's also sometimes internships or educational opportunities that can work too. So like if you're in the university, if you're going to college, or you're in high school, you might be able to research and find internships and things like that abroad, and that's a good opportunity for you to travel. Now, one thing, I got to bounce, but this was, thank you. Thanks for listening, constitutional peasant. Thanks for the help with the dolphin thing. I feel like such an idiot. Okay, so one reason why advanced parole can be useful is that, and I don't want this to get too confusing or weedy, but if you entered the United States illegally, without papers, walking through the desert or across the river, you typically don't later on qualify to get your green card here. You qualify to leave the country and go through what they call consular processing. So you actually have to leave the country and get your green card through the consulate, which is a long, really annoying process. I really hate consular processing. You can ask any of my clients who are consular processing right now, and they will tell you how long and stupid it is. It's long and it's stupid. So, for example, my parents carry me across the border in 1982. And so I entered illegally, technically. And then years later, I get married to a U.S. citizen, and she's going to petition for me. This is great, right? Perfect. I can just get my green card. Well, no, not really. I need to file a family petition, file a waiver for my unlawful presence, go back to my country and get my visa, my green card, in a foreign country, which is absurd, but that's the way that it is. And a lot of people with DACA are now married to U.S. citizens, and they're looking at that consular processing going, that's annoying. I don't necessarily want to do that. I don't necessarily want to go to Ciudad Juarez and apply for my green card there. And so if they travel on advanced parole and they re-enter the United States with admission and inspection and they're paroled into the United States, they now have the legal entry that they would need to qualify for getting their green card here. In some cases, some people hear this and they say, with DACA, you can travel to Mexico and come back and get a green card. It's not that simple. And a lot of people are disqualified anyways. So, I mean, even if they get and travel on advanced parole. So it's not necessarily cut and dry. But for a lot of people, this is a huge benefit. Plus the benefit of, I mean, obviously going back to your country and meeting your family and all of these things, it's a huge benefit. So that's another thing that's now back on the table that people can consider. Again, in terms of like the reason for the travel, it's important to establish it with actual evidence. You don't get to just say like, I want to go. So if it's grandma who's sick, you're going to need birth certificates to prove that's your grandma. And you're going to need probably a letter from the doctor in Mexico or your home country saying, yeah, she's not doing so hot and she wants to see her granddaughter or her grandson. So, or if you are applying for an internship, proof of an internship. All right, so I think we've reached the end of the English portion, and I'm going to try and do this again real quick in Español. Okay. Some days I just don't have it in terms of the Spanish, so I hope this goes okay. Ok, buenas tardes. Gracias por su paciencia. Si han escuchado hasta ahora en inglés sin entender inglés, pues qué paciencia tienen, ¿no? Impresionante. Ahora vamos a hablar sobre el programa de DACA, acción diferida para los jóvenes. Como ya saben, a lo mejor el programa fue implementado por el presidente Obama. Luego el tan querido presidente Trump intentó terminar el programa en septiembre y ahora está resucitado, ¿no? Gracias a las cortes otra vez la gente puede aplicar para DACA. Entonces, quiero revisar un poco los riesgos y los requisitos, que es lo que uno debe adjuntar para aplicar para su DACA. En primer lugar, mucha gente pregunta si necesitan de hecho un abogado. Pues siendo abogado yo voy a decir que sí. A la vez, DACA es una aplicación más o menos sencilla. Lo que yo siempre digo es que pueden mirar el proceso y si cree que puede, si cree que tiene la capacidad de aplicar por su propia cuenta, pues no hay problema, se puede hacer. A la vez, cualquier abogado le va a decir, y pues no estoy echando mentiras cuando digo que cada abogado ha pasado bastante tiempo arreglando problemas cuando la gente anda aplicando por su propia cuenta. Entonces, siempre hay el riesgo de que su aplicación esté rechazada o negada incluso. Entonces, con eso hay que tener cuidado. También mi consejo es que si tiene algún antecedente penal, cualquier encuentro con la policía, un arresto, aun si al final no hubo cargos o si al final se pagó todo, tiene que hablar con un abogado porque eso puede ser un problema. Uno puede aplicar, tener el caso negado y caer en problemas con la bendita migra, ¿no? Entonces, que tengan cuidado con eso. Ya, ok. Vamos a revisar ahora los requisitos. Aquí está la lista que yo tengo. A lo mejor hay errores aquí, pues perdóneme, por favor. Pero si no se lee muy bien y quiere una copia, yo se lo mando por correo electrónico. Me puede mandar un correo electrónico, un mensaje aquí abajo en el chat. Yo le mando una copia de esta lista. Ok. El primer requisito para DACA es que el aplicante entró con menos de 16 años. Si ya tuvo 16 cumplidos en México y luego entró, pues no califica. Y pues, y punto, ¿no? Entonces, uno tiene que haber cruzado la frontera con 15 años o menos. Ahora, eso tiene que comprobar con evidencia. Preferiblemente tendría registros médicos, escolares, algo de la escuela, un talón de cheque. Bueno, con 15 a lo mejor no está trabajando, quizás, ¿no? Pero alguna evidencia. En muchos casos esto puede ser complicado porque la gente entró, digamos, en marzo de 2007 y entre marzo y junio realmente no andaron haciendo mucho, no se inscribieron en la escuela, no se pusieron a trabajar, no fueron al doctor y no hay mucha evidencia. Tiene que pensar realmente bien en lo que hicieron en ese tiempo, si fueron al hospital, si hicieron alguna vacuna, ¿no? Algo que puede tener documentación. Eso es lo que va a querer buscar. Y hay que a veces pensar mucho. He tenido muchos clientes que al principio me dicen, no, pues no tengo nada, no hay nada, no hay nada, no hay nada. Y al final se dan cuenta de que sí. De hecho, fui al hospital ese año. Y pues vamos y buscamos y encontramos esos documentos para comprobar la entrada. Entonces, eso es lo primero, haber entrado con 15 o menos. Ya. Después, el segundo requisito es que el aplicante tenía que haber estado aquí constantemente o continuamente con una breve salida está permitida, pero tiene que haber vivido aquí desde junio de 2007. Entonces, tiene que tener comprobante de cada año. A veces la gente trae un montón de documentos de 2007, un documento de 2020 y dicen que pues todo ese tiempo está comprobado, pero no es así. La migra quiere algo de cada año. Entonces, cuando alguien me lleva su mochila, está llena de papeles y sacamos los papeles y hay algo de 2007, 2008, 2009, bien, 10, bien, 11, bien, 15, 16, etcétera, pues nos faltan esos 2 años y tiene que encontrar algo de ese tiempo. Entonces, yo sé que pues para la mayoría de mis clientes andan trabajando, hay un montón de talones de cheque, registros escolares, cosas así. Perfecto, muy bonito, ¿no? Pero hay gente que, por ejemplo, después del high school, después del colegio, pues no hicieron mucho por 1 año, 2 años, o trabajaron, pero trabajaron cash, o sea, les pagaron efectivo. Y en ese caso es más complicado encontrar la evidencia que se ocupa, la verdad. Pero hay que luchar y hacer la lucha pues para encontrar algo de cada año. Puede usar cartas como de testigos, pero no es una evidencia muy fuerte. Para la migra se considera pues una prueba secundaria. Si solamente tiene cartas, va a ser complicado. No necesariamente imposible, pero complicado. Yo hablaría con un abogado en esa situación. Después, el aplicante tiene que tener 15 años. Si su muchacho o su muchacha está en casa ahora, tiene 14, no puede aplicar. Tiene que esperar hasta que cumplen los 15. Y para comprobar su edad, siempre mandamos su acta de nacimiento traducido. Tiene que estar traducido. Se me olvidó mencionar eso cuando lo decimos en inglés. Está bien. Ahora, otro requisito es que tiene que haber terminado con high school, con su colegio aquí en Estados Unidos. Tiene que haber, o tiene que haber terminado su GED, o tiene que estar en high school o en un programa del GED. Entonces, si el aplicante anda ahora en la escuela, pues perfecto, nomás tiene que comprobar que está matriculado actualmente. Si alguien terminó con high school, pues su diploma, obviamente. Si tiene su GED, hay un certificado de eso. Mucha gente no terminó con high school y no tiene su GED, entonces puede matricularse ahora en un programa de GED. Tiene que ser un programa legítima. O sea, también con el high school. Hay muchos high schools o programas de GED que no son que no son certificados, digamos, o no tienen la autoridad del Estado para dar esas clases. Entonces, yo siempre digo que si hay un colegio de la comunidad dentro de su comunidad, pues aquí en Yakima hay uno que se llama YVCC, Yakima Valley Community College, y ellos tienen programas de GED. Puede matricularse, sacar una carta del programa comprobando que sí, esta persona está yendo a las clases y con eso puede aplicar. Ahora, yo siempre digo que pues si va a tomar las clases y paga las clases, debe hacer la lucha para de hecho sacar su GED. Es buena idea, digo yo. A la vez, hasta ahora, en el pasado, nunca fue un problema si una persona fue a las clases, hizo la lucha y al final no pudo pasar el examen o dejó de tomar las clases. Entonces, yo no estoy diciendo que debe matricularse solamente para sacar el comprobante y luego dejar de ir a las clases. No es mi recomendación. Jamás recomendaría eso. Yo sí creo que debe de ir y hacer el intento, ¿no? Pero sabiendo que si al final es muy complicado o no puede pasar el examen o simplemente no tiene tiempo, etcétera, lo que sea, pues está bien. No pasa nada todavía, pueden aprobar su DACA. Ok, entonces, el presidente Obama anunció este programa en junio de 2012. Uno de los requisitos es que el aplicante estuvo en los Estados Unidos cuando anunció el programa en junio de 2012. Entonces, si tiene talón de cheque, si tiene registros escolares, médicos, algo, pues tiene que entregar eso, pero del mes junio específicamente. Si me trae un talón de cheque de marzo o de septiembre de ese año, no es suficiente. Algo de junio. Ahora, si busca y absolutamente no hay nada del mes de junio, debe tener algo, ojalá, de mayo y julio, ¿no? Para, pues, comprobar que tiene las fechas cubiertas alrededor de la fecha más importante. Eso a veces puede servir, pero hay que buscar, ¿no? Ya. Como dije antes, si tiene algún récord criminal, cualquier arresto, como dije, aun si el caso fue pagado, terminado, etcétera, 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 tiene que hablar con un abogado. Puede ser un problema. Yo no voy a hablar hoy sobre las cosas que pueden descalificar a uno, pero hay cosas obvias y cosas no tan obvias. Es algo complicado. Manejar tomado puede descalificar a uno. Violencia doméstica, otras cosas así. Entonces, un abogado puede rodear esos documentos y analizar el caso sabiendo, pues, bajo la ley de cada estado, porque cada estado es diferente, pero pueden saber si va a calificar o no. Ok, también en los formularios, el querido gobierno, el Departamento de Seguridad de la Patria, DHS, quieren saber todos los domicilios que ha tenido desde que entró a los Estados Unidos. Hay gente que llega y vive en el mismo domicilio toda la vida. Bonito, ¿no? Bendito sea Dios. Hay otra gente que cada, no sé, cada 3 meses andan cambiando de casa. Y en esos casos, pues la lista es muy larga y más complicada. Pero así es, ¿no? Tiene que hacer la lista. Cuando alguien viene a mi oficina y dicen, pues, yo quiero contratarlo, pero no hice la lista porque es muy larga, pues yo tampoco tengo capacidad, yo sé menos de, los domicilios. Yo sé absolutamente nada de dónde han vivido. Entonces, es algo que realmente el aplicante tiene que trabajar para encontrar. Quieren 2 fotos tamaño pasaporte, se pueden comprar en Costco o Walgreens o, bueno, donde sea. La tarifa de esta aplicación es $495. Puede sacar un cheque o money orden hecho para el Departamento de Department of Homeland Security en inglés. También una copia de su ID con foto. Típicamente un ID escolar puede servir, ¿no? Si su muchacho o muchacha no tiene ID, no tiene licencia, pues obviamente pasaporte puede servir. O si tiene un ID de la escuela, eso también. Ok, mira, eso básicamente es todo. Si uno quiere aplicar, tiene que calificar en todos sentidos, entonces, y tiene que tener comprobante, es lo complicado. Hay gente que entró con 15 años, antes de junio 15 de 2007, no han salido del país, sacaron su diploma, no tienen antecedentes penales, estuvieron aquí en junio 15 de 2012, tienen de todo, pero no pueden comprobar una de estas cosas. Y para esa gente, a pesar de técnicamente haber calificado, a lo mejor el caso se va a negar. Entonces, no es suficiente meter una aplicación donde uno dice, no, sí, yo califico, pues pueden contar conmigo. La migra va a decir, no, pues tiene que comprobar cada elemento de este caso. Cuando fue recién anunciado el programa en junio de 2012, fue algo más sencillo porque solo tenía que comprobar los últimos 5 años y pues no es mucho tiempo, 5 años. Pero ahora estamos hablando de 13 años de evidencia. Va a ser mucha evidencia que uno tiene que rodear, la verdad. Entonces, pues les deseo mucha suerte en esa búsqueda. Todo lo que puedo decir ahora sin hablar personalmente con cada uno, cuando uno piensa que no hay evidencia, casi siempre hay, pero tiene que pensarlo bien, tiene que pensar si fueron al doctor alguna vez, si hicieron alguna vacuna, incluso si le dieron algún ticket, ¿no? Puede comprobar su presencia con un ticket de velocidad, ¿no? Una citatorio se dice, ¿no? Algo así. Si alguna vez fueron ¿cómo se dice? Al doctor, ya dije doctor, a la escuela, un talón de cheque. A veces no tiene talones, pero su patrón puede hacer una carta confirmando que andaba trabajando ahí, un resumen de sus cheques. Pues hay muchas cosas, ¿no? Entonces, tiene que buscar y puede costar tiempo y trabajo, pero por eso pueden empezar ya y empezar ese proceso, pues. No veo que hay más preguntas, ya se nos está acabando los oyentes. Entonces, gracias por haber escuchado. Yo voy a verificar si no hay preguntas. No creo que hay preguntas tampoco en Face, como dicen. Entonces, gracias por escuchar. Como dije al principio, pueden intentarlo ustedes mismos, pueden hablar con un abogado, pueden hablar conmigo, si quieren contratar un abogado para ayudar con el proceso. De eso no hay problema. Si quiere una copia de esta lista, yo se lo envío, no hay problema, sin compromiso, sin cobro, ¿no? Entonces, nomás écheme una llamada, un correo electrónico. No sé si se puede leer, pero mi correo electrónico es, let's see, Steven@robinsimmigration.com. Look at that. Mandándome un correo electrónico aquí a este correo, Steven@robinsimmigration.com. Yo le mando la copia de la lista para su uso personal. Gracias por escuchar. Ha sido un placer. Quizás debemos hacer esto cada semana. Eso a lo mejor sería mucho, pero de vez en cuando sería bonito. Muchas gracias y hasta la